Okay, so we're going to look at solving inequalities. And solving inequalities is the same idea as solving equations. It's the exact same steps. There is one exception, and we're going to talk about that. So to solve to get the variable to one side of the inequality, it's recommended, especially because you're going to have to graph these and do them in interval notation, to get the variable on the left side of the inequality. So we're going to always move the variable to the left side. Again, it's not wrong if you do the right side, it's just recommended. It makes it easier to graph. And we use the same procedures as solving an equation with one important additional rule. So I want to show you why we have to do this rule. And I'm going to use just like two numbers. 2 is less than 4. So like if I have 2 is less than 4, and if we think about one equation, if we multiply and divide, we have to do it the same thing to both sides. What I could do is like if I multiply both sides, like for example, by 2, 2 times 2 less than 2 times 4, I get 4 is less than 8, and that's true. Okay, that's still true, and this is still true. And if I have like 2 is less than 4, again, if I multiply by a negative number, like any number, so if I multiply both sides by -2, and I'm multiplying both sides because we're thinking like an equation and we have to keep it balanced. What you do to one side, you have to do the other. I get -4 is less than -8, and that is not true. Again, think about a number line. Here's -4. Here's -8. So -8 is less than -4. And so if I multiply by a negative, it makes the inequality not true. And the same thing would be as if I divided, if I have 2 is less than 4 and I divide both by -2, I get -1 is less than -2. And this is false as well. So because that happens, if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to reverse or flip the direction of the inequality symbol to make it true. So if I divide by a negative, this is false. What we do is we're going to flip the inequality down here, flip this inequality. So I'd have -1 is greater than -2, and then it's true. Okay, and here, same thing, we'd have to flip the inequality to make it true. And so anytime you multiply or divide by a negative number when we're solving an inequality, we're going to flip the direction of the inequality symbol. And that's the only thing that's different. And we're going to do it with equations, like you're going to have variables in it. I'm just trying to show you with this, like why it's true and why we have to do that. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to solve these inequalities, and then we're going to graph our solution and give the solution in interval notation. So we have 4x is less than 16. Treat it just like an equation. We would divide both sides by 4. Keep the same symbol. Okay, don't change it to an equal sign. Keep the same symbol. So these 4's cancel or you get 1. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And so our answer is x is less than 4. Okay, and that means any number smaller than 4 is true for this inequality. So we graph our solution, what we did in the last video, is we draw a number line. We again draw either a parentheses or bracket because it's less than and doesn't have the equal sign. We're going to do a parentheses, and because it's less than, I'm shading to the left. I want smaller numbers than 4. So I'm going to do parentheses to the left and then shade to the left. And then if I want interval notation, what I'm going to do is I am going to the left. So I start to the left. To the left, we say if it keeps going, it's negative infinity. So we put parentheses, negative infinity, comma, we're stopping at 4. Then we put parentheses, and that's my interval notation. Okay, and we're going to do that for each inequality. We're going to graph it, solve it, graph it, and then do interval notation. Okay, so we have -3x minus 3 is greater than or equal to 9. So we're going to do the steps. We're gonna add 3 to both sides. These cancel, 9 plus 3 is 12. And then the next step is we would divide both sides by -3. Now here is where there is a special rule when we have inequalities. Whenever I divide or multiply by a negative, not a positive, by a negative number, so I'm dividing both sides by a negative number, I have to flip the inequality to make it stay a true statement. So we're going to do x is less than or equal to, we flip the inequality, -4. And again, it's only if we're multiplying or dividing both sides by a negative number. Okay, so then we're going to graph it. So I'm going to draw my number line. I'm starting at -4. I need a bracket because it's closed, because it's equal, less than or equal to. I want less than, so anytime I'm less than, my arrow is going to point, it points the same way as the inequality, so it's going to point to the left. So I'm going to draw a bracket to the left and shade to the left because I want smaller values. And then if I want interval notation, again, we're going to -infinity, so we put parentheses, comma, we're stopping at -4, and then I put a bracket on it, just like I did for that. Okay, so for 3 and 4, it's kind of the same idea. We're gonna solve those equations, and then we are going to simplify. So to solve this equation, we need to get the x's to one side and the numbers to the other. The recommendation is always move the x to the left when we're doing inequalities. So I'm going to, I can't combine any like terms. I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides and line up my like terms. These cancel. I get x plus 6 is less than or equal to -5. Negative. Then we're going to move the 6 over. We have to do the inverse operation, so we have to subtract 6. We get x is less than or equal to -11. So that's my answer. I don't have to flip anything. I didn't divide by a negative. I'm going to draw my number line. I'm not going to start at 0 because that's really far. So I'm going to do -11, -12, -13, 10, -9. I just need numbers to both sides. Because it has the equal sign, we're going to use the bracket. And I'm going less than, so I want numbers less than -11. So again, I follow where my arrow is, or my point is, that's where my arrow goes. So I'm going to bracket to the left, shade to the left. And then for interval, we're going to -infinity is where my arrow goes. So we always put parentheses on that, to -11 and then a bracket. Okay, and then again, you can pause these and then check, but I'm just gonna do this one, last one. So we're gonna solve this one. So again, the first thing we do is clear the parentheses. Remember, this is like a -1 in front that I have to distribute to both of these. So I have 5x, -1 times x is a -x, so it becomes -x. -1 times +2, again, is a -2, becomes -2, greater than. We're going to distribute the 5. So 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times x is 5x plus 3. Okay, so we always clear parentheses. The next step is we combine any like terms. So I have 5x minus x, which is 4x. Bring down the -2, greater than. This side I have 5 plus 3, which is 8. I'm just going to put the x first. So 5x plus 8 are my like terms. And we combine like terms on both sides. Then we have to get x's to one side, numbers to the other. So again, I know a lot of times like people like to move the smaller number, but it's always recommended to get the x on the left side. If you don't, you need to move it to the x side, left side before you graph it. So I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. I get 4x minus 5x is negative 1x, or negative x minus 2 is greater than 8. And then I need to move the 2 over. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. I get negative 1x is greater than 10. And then the last step is I need to get rid of this negative sign, negative 1. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. When I divided by a negative, I have to flip the inequality. So I have x is less than, I flip the sign. So if it's greater than, I make it less than negative 10. Then we're going to draw our number line. So again, this is kind of small, so I'm going to just start with negative 10, negative 9, negative 8. Put numbers on both sides. I'm going to do a parenthesis because it doesn't have the equal sign. But I'm going, it's going to go left because it opens to because the point's to the left. We want to there to left, or we want, if you think about numbers that are smaller than negative 10, which is this side. So I do parentheses, shade. And then for interval, again, I'm going towards negative infinity. So it'd be parentheses, negative infinity, comma, to 10, and then we put parentheses. Okay, and so that is solving inequalities. Again, it's the same process. You just have to remember to flip the inequality when you have a negative. And then you need to make sure you know how to graph it and do interval notation.